I never imagined my life would change so drastically after inheriting my late parents' estate, a magnificent mansion valued at $125 million. This property, a symbol of their love and hard work, was now my responsibility. I had barely settled into the mansion, trying to adjust to my new reality, when my world took an unexpected turn. One afternoon, my mother-in-law, Grace, barged into the house unannounced, accompanied by my sister-in-law, Emma, and brother-in-law, James. Their arrival was abrupt and unsettling. Without any courtesy or warning, they stormed in, their faces tense and determined. "Gianna, we need to talk," Grace said, her voice cold and demanding. I froze, confused and uneasy. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, trying to make sense of their sudden intrusion. Emma smirked as she handed me a stack of papers. "You'll want to see these," she said smugly. As I unfolded the papers, my stomach churned. They were forged documents, poorly created to look like legal claims to my home. My hands trembled as I read through them, the shocking realization hitting me hard: this was their attempt to steal the house. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaky with disbelief. "You can't just walk in here and claim my home." "Oh, but we can," James sneered, folding his arms across his chest. "These papers prove that this house belongs to Grace now. It's time for you to leave." I looked desperately at my husband, David, who stood silently in the corner, his arms crossed. I expected him to step in and defend me, but his expression was emotionless. My heart sank. "David, please say something," I begged, my voice breaking with desperation. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His silence was a betrayal deeper than words. Grace took a step closer, her eyes cold and unrelenting. "This is for the best," she said in a condescending tone. "You don't need to deal with the burden of such a massive house. We'll take care of everything from now on." Her words ignited a fire within me. "This is my home," I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. "You have no right to take it from me." Before I could react, Grace's face twisted with fury. Without warning, she slapped me across the face. The force of it made me stagger backward, my cheeks stinging from the blow. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened. "You will not disrespect my mother," Emma shouted, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you talk back to her?" Encouraged by their support, James began grabbing my personal belongings, photo albums, sentimental keepsakes, even my sketches, and tossing them carelessly toward the front door. "Get out!" James yelled, his words cutting through me like a knife. I stood frozen, watching in disbelief as my life was being uprooted before my eyes. My own husband, the man I had trusted and loved, remained silent, a passive observer to the chaos unfolding around us. "David, please," I cried out, tears streaming down my face. "How can you just stand there and let this happen?" He finally spoke, but his words were void of any emotion. "Gianna, let's not make this worse. Maybe it's better if you just let it go. Let it go," I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You're letting them throw me out of my own house." "David, this is my home, not theirs." Grace's smirk grew even wider. "You're just a guest here," she said venomously. "This house belongs to us now." My heart pounded in my chest as I fought back the tears. The weight of betrayal and heartbreak pressed heavily on me. But even in my darkest moment, a spark of determination ignited within me. "This isn't over," I said firmly, my voice steadied despite the fear and pain I felt. "You're not taking my home. I'll fight this with everything I have." Grace scoffed, clearly unimpressed by my resolve. "We'll see about that," she sneered before motioning for Emma and James to follow her out. They left, my belongings scattered across the floor. The house now felt more like a battleground than a sanctuary. As the door slammed shut behind them, I sank to the floor, my body trembling with anger and despair. But I knew I couldn't let them win. This was more than just a fight for a house. It was a fight for my dignity, my independence, and everything I had worked so hard to protect. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the chaos they had left behind, my belongings tossed aside like they meant nothing. My heart ached as I replayed David's cold, indifferent reaction. The man I thought would stand by me had sided with his family, leaving me to fend for myself. But I wasn't ready to give up. This house was more than just bricks and mortar, it was a piece of my parents' legacy. And I would not let anyone take it away from me. I wiped away my tears, stood up, and took a deep breath. It was time to fight back. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I explained the situation in detail, my voice trembling but determined. The lawyer, Mr. Jackson, listened patiently and assured me that I had a strong case. "Gianna, from what you've told me, their claim is baseless," he said reassuringly. "As long as you have the original documents proving ownership, they can't do anything legally. I recommend filing a restraining order against them to prevent further harassment." His words gave me a glimmer of hope. "I'll get everything together," I replied, my voice steady. "Thank you for your help." Over the next few days, I prepared for the battle ahead. I poured all my energy into gathering evidence. I dug out my parents' will, the property deeds, and every document I could find that proved the house was legally mine. I also wrote down every detail of the confrontation, determined to document the threats and aggression from Grace, Emma, and James. David, however, continued to distance himself. He avoided eye contact, spent most of his time outside, and barely spoke to me. It was as if he couldn't face the reality of what his family had done, or perhaps he simply didn't care. One evening, as I was organizing the evidence in the living room, David finally spoke. "Gianna," he said hesitantly, "do you really think going to court is the right thing to do? This could get messy." I looked up at him, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Messy, David? Your family tried to steal my home. They physically attacked me, threw my things out, and made it clear they don't respect me or this house. What choice do I have?" He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. I don't want things to escalate. Maybe we can find a way to resolve this without involving lawyers." I shook my head, disappointment washing over me. "Resolve this how? By letting them win?" "No, David. I'm done being silent. If you won't stand by me, I'll fight this battle alone." His silence was all the answer I needed. I turned away, focusing on my preparations. I couldn't afford to waste any more time hoping he'd come around. The day of the court hearing arrived. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, despite the anxiety gnawing at me. Mr. Jackson had prepped me well, and I was determined to make my case. As I entered the courtroom, my heart sank at the sight of Grace, Emma, and James sitting on the opposite side, their faces full of smug confidence. David sat with them, his expression unreadable. I fought the lump in my throat and focused on the task at hand. The judge called the case to order, and Mr. Jackson presented the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. He detailed the forged documents, the physical threats, and the illegal attempt to claim ownership of my home. Every word felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall and addressed the court. "This house is more than just a property to me. It's my parents' legacy. They worked hard to build a life for me, and I will not let anyone take that away, not through lies, manipulation, or intimidation." Grace's lawyer tried to counter my claims, but the evidence was undeniable. The forged documents were amateurish at best, and my ownership of the house was clearly established. As the judge reviewed the evidence, I held my breath, praying for a favorable outcome. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. The court finds that the property in question legally belongs to Gianna. The defendant's claim is dismissed, and a restraining order is issued to prevent further interference. Relief washed over me as the verdict was announced. I had won. As I stepped out of the courthouse, a wave of emotions flooded me: relief, pride, and a deep sense of justice. I had stood up for myself against Grace, Emma, and James, and I had won. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But the victory came with its own weight. David walked out of the courthouse with his family, avoiding my gaze. Grace's face twisted with anger, and as she passed me, she hissed, "You'll regret this, Gianna. This isn't over." I stood tall, meeting her glare with unwavering determination. "You've already lost, Grace. Stay off my property, or you'll face the consequences." Grace stormed away, pulling Emma and James along with her. David lingered behind, his expression conflicted. I turned to him, my voice steady but firm. "You need to make a choice, David. I won't live like this anymore." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Gianna, I don't know what to do. They're my family. And I was supposed to be your family too," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. "But when I needed you, you chose them. I can't keep fighting for this marriage if you're not willing to fight for me." David looked at me, his face full of regret, but he said nothing. I shook my head, realizing that I couldn't wait for him to change. It was time for me to move forward, alone if necessary. In the weeks that followed, I focused on reclaiming my home and rebuilding my life. I hired contractors to repair the damage Grace's family had caused during their intrusion, and with each renovation, the house began to feel like mine again. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and filled the space with items that brought me joy. David remained distant, spending more and more time away from the house. It became clear that he wasn't willing to stand up to his family, and I wasn't willing to compromise my dignity any longer. One evening, as he packed his belongings, he finally said the words I had been expecting. "I think it's best if I leave," he murmured, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness but also relief. "I think so too." As he walked out the door, I felt a mix of emotions: grief for the relationship we had lost, but also a sense of liberation. I had fought for myself, for my home, and for my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. With David gone, I threw myself into my work and hobbies, rediscovering my independence. The mansion, once a source of pain and conflict, became a sanctuary, a place where I could heal and grow. I had lost people along the way, but I had found something far more valuable: myself. I began hosting small gatherings with friends, filling the house with laughter and warmth once again. Grace's threats gradually faded into the background as the restraining order kept her and her family away. I never heard from David, nor did I expect to. I had moved on, and I was stronger for it. One evening, as I stood on the porch watching the sun set over the expansive property, I felt a profound sense of peace. The fight had been worth it. I had reclaimed not only my home but also my confidence and sense of self. This mansion was more than just a house, it was a testament to my resilience and strength. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I could face them with the same determination that had carried me through this battle. I was no longer the woman who let others dictate her life. I was the woman who fought back and won.